Hello, everybody. This is Christopher Phillips, the fearless founder of Democracy Cafe, dedicated to making ours a more thoughtful, connected, even dare I say, lovable and livable world. And we've been doing this now for 24 years with our flagship initiatives, Democracy Cafe, Socrates Cafe, and Constitution Cafe. And my guest today is one of our advisory board members. We had kind of fallen out of touch a little bit, but it's Brian Austin. Brian, you have come far even since the time that you and I last saw each other some years ago when I came to Madison to hold that great Constitution Cafe with you and fellow officers. You're now captain of investigative services and deputy SWAT commander.
Yes. Yeah. Things have changed a lot. I was a detective.
They like you.
They do. Yeah. We had a chief that I really felt good about working for and felt good about taking the next step towards the management, more of a leadership position. And it's been good. I've enjoyed it.
Now, is this the same chief who came to our gathering? Our Constitution Cafe?
Yes, he actually retired late last year. So we have an interim chief now.
Okay.
And a search that our Police and Fire Commission for the city of Madison is engaged in a search for a new chief.
I see. Well, he was wonderful.
Yeah.
And you actually managed to get together a very diverse group of officers, diverse in terms of what their job responsibilities are and what their political perspectives were as we examined the First Amendment. And I was, it made me feel good. It made me feel good that they trusted me enough, somebody that hadn't met before, to speak frankly about their views without feeling like they had to get in debate mode. And just to have a thoughtful exchange about what they see their role as in terms of facilitating the First Amendment. I think that's fairly unique to Madison, or could I be wrong about that?
I'm sure there are other agencies that bring a nice level of diversity, but Madison is, I think the department is very reflective of the community. And so we have one of the highest percentages of women in the department nationwide. We try to attract a very diverse workforce because we feel that, the officers that are policing the community should reflect the community. And so, it's a nice mix of people. And I think we have a group that is very open to talking about these issues. And that's, what's been a little bit frustrating the last couple of weeks, because I feel like the willingness to engage and talk is not being utilized as much by the community as we might like.
Can you tell me a little bit more about that? What do you mean exactly? I mean, do you think it's this natural sort of us versus them mentality?
Yeah, and it's been a little disconcerting. So we obviously watched the events unfolding in Minneapolis, and I can tell you that I won't sugarcoat or I'm certainly not a police apologist, but I will say for the first time in 23 years, what I saw was a widespread condemnation of that video in the law enforcement community, which is something that's rare. There is something to be said about historically, a lot of kind of insular behavior from the policing profession. And in this situation, I saw across the board, cops coming out and saying this was wrong. This was essentially murder, that this is not acceptable behavior, that we reject this kind of, incident. And it was, I thought, going to be a really good opportunity for us to meet the community, at the table and say, okay, we can all agree this is not okay. And this is a jumping off point for a broader discussion. Tell us how you as a community believe we can prevent these incidents. What changes do you need to see from us, and kind of how can you meet us halfway? And instead we saw, this really dramatic, kind of protest movement, which then transformed, at least in hours of darkness, into something different. And it really drove everybody to their corners, back to their corners. And that to me was really frustrating, because you have, I think, for the first time that I've seen, a really kind of openness on the part of police to talk about this incident and talk honestly and candidly. And then it kind of disintegrated. And so that's been, we've been living that for, the past couple of weeks. And I think our people are really exhausted. Most of us have been working 12 to 16-hour days without any days off in the last 16, 17 days. And so, it's been tough.
And sleep deprivation excess in and of itself, combined with stress and lots of other things, can, in my experience, can get a normal person to maybe do some things he wouldn't necessarily do under other circumstances.
Yeah. Our folks are, I think, holding up well. We're a resilient bunch, but we've the first couple of days, I can tell you that the temperature has really been turned down, which is good. The first couple of days were quite dangerous. We had a number of officers injured. The team that I supervised was shot at. It was really kind of
was shot at.
Yes, was shot at. We took a round to the vehicle they were traveling in, and luckily it did not penetrate, but it was quite alarming, obviously.
So when you say you've sort of crossed the board condemnation from the police about the killing of George Floyd, are you talking about among Madison police or police in general? I mean, you must be part of networks where y'all communicate with each other.
Yeah. No, I would say nationwide, I've seen police agency, from the chiefs of police speaking out formally to rank and file officers saying, that's not the way we're trained. That is not the type of guardian we want to be to our community. That was unnecessary. And, there was, I think, both kind of shock and revulsion about the actual conduct of the officer that was kneeling on Mr. Floyd, but then also the officers that were standing around watching it. And so I think, both of those, let's put it this way, I haven't seen any police officer in any of the circles on social media or anything like that try to justify what they saw, which is really remarkable.
But it seems to me like that's the fabric, or supposed to be, of a democracy, is to be able to take a hard look at oneself and the context of one's society and have those, not just difficult conversations, but that lens of critical scrutiny to examine who we are and where we're going. And when we no longer embrace that, in fact, many shun it, I worry about where we're going.
Yeah, it's, to think that you can't do better is hubris, right? Because we're all humans and we're all fallible, and we should all, I think, seek to improve ourselves as we go along. And that's especially true in policing, given the dramatic power that society vests us with. And, we, I think, have a lot to learn. And so I hope this turns into something very positive. But to me, this is where I see some of the tactics, I think, in terms of leaving police out of the conversation. We want you defunded, and I know there's a lot of kind of discussion as to what that actually means, but what I'm not seeing is police being integrated into these conversations. Now we're being presented as the enemy. We're out of control. We need to be reined in and reformed. But it rejects the notion that there's a lot of good, competent, ethical, caring, compassionate, kind police officers out there that would love to be part of this conversation.
So how do you make that conversation happen when the social temperature of division is turned up so high, and you arguably have a president Mr. Law and Order, who's never risked anything in his entire life, basically fanning the flames of that and invoking language that was used during the civil rights movement against those who were clamoring to be treated as equals.
Sure. I mean, when I read his tweet that looters will be shot, I mean,
when the looting starts, the
disturbing.
shooting starts.
Yeah, yeah. It's, I mean, completely unacceptable. And I think, there are a number of, I think, groups on both sides of this that the division achieves a goal for them. So I think, certainly there are goals for the group you just mentioned, and, dividing the police from the people is achieve certain things. But on the other side too, the police are a really good symbol of oppression that seems to get people out into the streets and gets emotions running high. So it's a very useful tool, I think, organizing tool, bad police behavior. I've always said that real progress will occur when we stop viewing police as the enemy and we start viewing them as part of the community. And I know we have a responsibility in that equation to live up to that. But I think, once we start breaking down the divide, that's where real progress will start.
How do you do that now, at a time when there's so much demonization, at a time when nobody really even wants to listen to one another? How do you create, and again, to me, it's the backbone of a democracy. How do you institutionalize that, or even make inroads at a time when it's the demonizing of the other, when there's a willful creation of us versus them? Even somebody like you who's been willing to protest and willing to be arrested, even that seems to be more difficult. They don't want you, almost.
Yeah. So I think, I think number one, you do have to let the temperature turn down a little bit. I think you just have to signal a willingness to talk whenever people are at that point where they want to do that. So, and I think you have to come to the table very willing to accept the realities that we have created for certain people, or help create, and some of the flaws that exist in our profession. Mm-hmm. And I think the other side has to come to the table and acknowledge the difficulty that police face in a very violent society with a lot of firearms and a lot of economic stressors that we certainly did not create. And we're a symbol, but we are certainly not the heart of the problem, in my opinion. The heart of this problem runs far deeper. Structural inequalities that exist in our country, and we're just a symbol for that. And unfortunately, those structural inequalities are probably going to get worse as we see kind of the economic fallout of the COVID pandemic, and other challenges. The distribution of wealth is certainly not improving in this country, and all those problems get dumped on our doorstep. So it's quite a challenge.
You and police officers and general practitioners at hospitals, you're like among the last. Everything's expected of you. You're supposed to be able to offer a little bit of everything.
I mean, what people don't understand is the last 2-3 months, while everybody's been hunkered down, working remotely, police officers, along with medical professionals and firefighters, have been out on the street, wondering every day they go to work, is this the day I'm going to get exposed? Is this the day I'm going to get sick? And the stress of that is extraordinary. And then to follow that up with, these really dramatic, emotional protests where, there's rocks, bottles, and gunshots occurring, it's been a challenge.
How, I was raised in the Washington, D.C. area after, in the time when Martin Luther King was assassinated. And my dad actually drove, he was a son of poor Greek immigrants. We drove through the riot area. These buildings were still smoldering. And he wanted just to bear witness to what was happening. And the thing that I asked him as a 9-year-old was, why are they destroying their own community? The looting. It seemed to contravene the entire approach of Dr. King himself about effective, peaceful nonviolence. And then there's the argument, well, you need Dr. King and you need sort of Malcolm X as well. You need both sort of violent and nonviolent sides. But I still have, I grapple with the issue of looting as anything other than piggybacking on a legitimate protest to delegitimize just about everybody involved who have good ends in mind.
Right. And, you know, that's a really complex discussion. I think in some cities nationwide, you have seen actual agitators from the white nationalist movements who go in and piggyback to actively try to discredit.
Wow.
I think you've seen, I frankly don't think we've seen that in Madison. I'd be very candid if we had, but again, people want to kind of clump these narratives into very neat piles, and it's just not possible. I think you have kind of an anarchist faction of these groups that, again, their whole kind of goal is disorder, and you know, and then you have people that are just kind of opportunists that really aren't interested in the protests. You know, the protests during the day, even the first couple of days, the very first day that the riots occurred, the protest prior to that, which spanned hours, was very peaceful. And, you know, there was a lot of anger towards police, and our people, you know, I certainly probably didn't enjoy hearing that. And there was a lot of, you know, slurs towards the police and all that, but it was still peaceful. And we're used to facilitating peaceful protests in Madison. I mean, we're really good at it. It just, you know, as soon as darkness came, it became a much, much different thing. And again, I don't blame the protest organizers or 99% of the people that showed up to the, you know, during the day to have their voices heard. It was that very small group. But it really caused, you know, a dramatic amount of damage. I mean, our entire business district downtown is shut down. Every single business is boarded up right now.
That's where I did my book events.
Either damaged or trying to prevent damage and waiting until this kind of blows over. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I struggle with the looting too, and I struggle even more with the you know, the assaults towards my officers. You know, we've taken some criticism in Madison for deploying tear gas, chemical agents, but I tell you what, there really is no other solution when you have bricks and concrete and street signs being thrown at you and you know, widespread looting. It was absolute chaos first couple of nights.
You know, I'm juxtaposing what you're telling me with, then you have peaceful protesters in Lafayette Square across from the White House who were tear gassed and because of the president wanted a photo op. And so today, the highest ranking military officer who accompanied him for the photo op apologized after the fact. But so I'm wondering what it does to those who are out to exercise their First Amendment right to peaceable assembly when they're attacked when they haven't provoked anything, when there's no provocation. I mean, it demoralizes. I've heard comments from National Guard troops like, what are we doing? I mean, what is it? It's almost like a willful attempt to tear the fabric of America apart.
And we're in Madison, we are extremely cognizant of that. I mean, our method of crowd control has been adopted by progressive departments nationwide. It's called the Madison method. And our goal is to really avoid a violent confrontation at all costs. Our set team officers, which is our crowd control team, does not routinely go out in what we call hard gear. We have the helmets and the chest protector and all that until until they have to. And frankly, I have a couple of friends of mine that took bricks to their helmets that, had their helmet not been on, would have probably caved their skull in, and we probably would have had a very serious injury, if not death. So, you know, we have to, so, you know, our goal is to avoid that at all costs. And I think certainly the people that were intent on peaceful protesting achieved that during the periods that you know, that was allowed to occur. It's just, you know, things went sideways after the fact, and you know, we really rarely use chemical agents. The last time I can remember us doing that is to clear the street during our Halloween celebration, which every year is a challenge, and we haven't had to do that for many years. But at the peak of our Halloween celebrations, we'd have 100,000 people downtown, intoxicated, and again, the looting starts and all that. But generally speaking, we absolutely avoid the use of chemical agents unless our officers are in significant danger.
Mm-hmm. Sometimes it's a truly a no-win situation. There just is no right course per se. You're damned if you do and damned if you don't.
Yeah, the one thing I'll say is we have to start humanizing each other. None of this will get solved unless we can see each other as equal human beings with hopes and dreams, and treat each other. Empathy is really a value that is not emphasized enough in our society, in my opinion. And without empathy, it becomes very hard to discuss these things because you can't put yourself in other people's positions. So I think you have to start small and start with your own circle. And my wife and I teach our kids about empathy and kindness, and understanding that everybody you contact has struggles in their life that you're not aware of, and so we need to, I think, start talking to each other through that lens more. Again, I don't know really how that occurs unless both sides are willing to come to the table, and that includes both policing and the people that are protesting.
Brian, where did your notion, that beautiful ethos of we have to humanize each other, where did that come from with you? How was that instilled in you?
I think the way I was raised, I had parents that were very kind. My mom, especially, she passed away when I was 11, but in that short time I had her in my life, she was a very, very kind and empathetic person, and that was a value that was very frequently talked about in my household. And I think, especially, and even the fact of losing her to illness made me much more empathetic to other people's struggles, because I think I knew what pain meant in life, and so I think it's just something that was instilled in me very young.
And what is it, your children and your wife, they must worry terribly about you each and every day, that you leave the sanctity of your home sanctuary and have to go out and do your duty?
Yeah, I think it's been tough on them. My daughter is our youngest. She's 13, and it's been, I think, particularly stressful for her to have me gone. And again, I've been gone. I literally come home, eat something, and go to bed, just sleep for a few hours. And so that's been tough on them. And again, it's I know our family is a very progressive family, and we share progressive values. And I'm also a police officer, and it's very hard for them and me to reconcile that all of a sudden I've become the enemy. And it's just a very surreal experience. They have to talk to their friends about this, and again, because there's so little nuance now presented in the conversation, you're if the right is calling the protesters rioters and violent, and the protesters are calling the police racist thugs, and until we kind of find some nuance to that, it's going to continue to be tough.
You must have lost some friends, or not ever even been able to make friends, who distrust your progressivism because you're a cop.
Yeah, I've seen that before. Whenever we have these kind of, I think during the Ferguson situation, the kind of snowball, I saw that too. Some alliances and paths of communication tend to break down during these times. Some friends go radio silent, as we say, in terms of reaching out, and that's, I get it. Again, with the emotional content of this conversation, I think anybody that supports the police right now is perceived as not supporting the Black Lives Matter movement. And again, in my opinion, they are absolutely not mutually exclusive things. They can be done in harmony together, because Black lives do matter, And there are good police officers out there, and we can acknowledge both facts without denigrating the other side.
So, Brian, you've been a police officer now for how long?
23 years.
23 years. You studied, trained as a lawyer.
Yes.
What was it about the law enforcement profession that attracted you? As a progressive, I should add.
Yeah, and I think what attracted me is what is making this current situation so painful. What attracted me is the ability to build relationships. As a lawyer in court, you're what I like to tell people is you're kind of recreating a play, right? It's a play about or a performance about things that happened previously, and what I wanted was a more rich and real experience where I'm dealing with these situations and helping people at the moment that they need it, and building rapport and trying to put people's lives back together a little bit before I leave them for the evening. And so just kind of the realness and of those relationships and those interactions is what attracted me. And so I think when we reach these points in society where police are now pushed away again, it becomes, it really takes away a lot of why most of us signed up to do this, and it becomes very frustrating. My fear is we're going to lose a lot of good people who decide this isn't worth it. Not only am I experiencing danger now, the risk of illness and a pandemic, but now I'm also called the enemy. It's for a young person that is invested in a retirement system and has other options, it's going to be tough for them to think about staying.
What do your kids think about what you do?
I think they're very proud of it. It concerns them, it worries them. I've been in jobs where I routinely get called out in the middle of the night. That's a common occurrence, and they know I spent 16 years on the SWAT team as
incredible,
what we call an operator, the person that does the work. Now, currently I'm in a command position, so my physical danger is certainly much less. Probably more in political danger now than physical danger as a upper management person. So I think, in that aspect, everybody's a little bit better with it, but it's definitely not your average career.
Well, you've managed to navigate successfully, and you've navigated a lot of different minefields. I mean, the bureaucracy within the police department, your own conscience, your own progressivism, through many trials and tribulations. And here you are, still a dedicated, committed, to me, from knowing you now for years, an unjaded guy, even going through what you're going right now.
Yeah, I still feel that sense of optimism, as tough as the last couple of weeks have been.
Wow.
I still feel that we can get through this and we can be in a better place. I'm fortunate where I've worked for a department that has never made me compromise my values, or never tried to, because I think, again, I would have left the profession before I compromised my own values. But again, those values of kindness and compassion I bring are valued in my organization, and certainly nobody has tried to get me to abandon those, and I won't police in a way that doesn't meet my ethical code. So I've been fortunate to work for a really good agency, and I don't feel like I'm jaded, but I certainly were a little bit beaten down right now, especially since we weren't responsible for what those people did in Minneapolis, right? We're not responsible for the Philadelphia cops that were going crazy and hitting people with batons. We're in Madison, Wisconsin, and unfortunately, we're at a point where the sins of the few are imparted to the entire group. And I saw an interesting comment from one of my friends on social media that said, "Now you know how it feels to be a person of color." Where you're, and it was a really, I admit that was a very jarring but also engaging comment. Like, it made me stop and think, like, no, that's interesting. This person said, well, yeah, you don't like being accused of things you didn't do because of the color of your uniform, right? That's a valid point.
Your plan is to stick with your calling profession for
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I'm certainly probably in the downward arc of my career. I probably have about 4 more years before I'll start considering retiring and then moving on to another profession. Obviously, I'll be young enough where I won't stop working.
Mhm.
But I'm going to stick it through, until that time. So,
What would you do next? What are some ideas? You must have thought about it.
Um, I want to do something meaningful, but not directly law enforcement related. I could see certainly utilizing my law degree in a broader sense. Maybe expanding the conversation a little bit more somehow, and maybe doing some traveling and talking to groups again, something that can help maybe bridge that divide. Because I occupy so many kind of unique spaces right now, I think I could probably leverage that into something meaningful when I leave. But that's still a work in progress.
No question you could do that. What drew me to you all those years ago was shortly before my visit, you were willing to protest. I think it was called Act 10, and you were
Yes.
willing to actually be arrested. I think there was one firefighter arrested who joined the protesters singing, for God's sake.
Yes.
And
and
you went out there and put it on the line too.
Yeah, that was a legislation that was passed that took away the collective bargaining rights of public employees in Wisconsin. And really the antithesis of what our state government had stood for decades. And so the police and the firefighters, who were exempt from the legislation, by the way, went out and stood with the teachers and the public works workers and protested. And then people who were in the Capitol building in the weeks to follow started being arrested for simply singing in the rotunda, which is a public space. And that's where several officers and I and firefighters went together to join them, even though I hate singing. But it was, you want to talk about feeling like you're stepping off a cliff. But again, you go back to those ethics and values, and to me, what I was seeing from other police agencies in legitimate First Amendment speech did not mesh with my values, and I felt the need to speak out.
You have what I call chutzpah.
Thank you. Yes, that's a phrase well known to my people.
Well, you do. You've got, but it's this social conscience and this willingness to put things on the line. Your fellow officers might have had to arrest you, and you were willing to do that. You founded Cops for Labor, for heaven's sake. I mean, but you have always carved out this niche that to me is always looking a generation forward. You're not just looking at what is a police department or public safety official doing now, but what can they be? What should they be? And they should be practicing citizens too.
Yeah. And I think what I've seen is we need to make broader changes as a society to achieve some of these goals. And to me, the thing we really have to tackle, next, and it's probably a little off topic, but is this extraordinary economic inequality that our country is facing, which really disproportionately affects people of color. And so the police intermesh in that struggle in ways which isn't always positive. And I think we need to, at some point, recognize, and even the people protesting who may come out, the upper middle class white folk that come out and yell at the police for a while, feel really good about it, go home to their privileged lives, and aren't making any kind of economic argument. They're very comfortable in their current position, and while other people are suffering. And I think that's kind of in addition to the police reforms that people think there's some underlying issues. The sins of the police are certainly a symptom of a broader problem, in my opinion.
Brian, thank you so much for taking the time. Brian Austin, who is on our Democracy Cafe Advisory Board, which speaks about how our goals do mesh and creating those places and spaces to try to at least explore with one another, with diverse ones and others, these hard questions and with critical lenses and self-honesty. Captain of Investigative Services Section and also Deputy SWAT Commander. Let's do this more often, but thank you so much for your time, and I look forward to connecting again soon.
It was a real pleasure. Thanks for inviting me on.
Thank you, Brian.
Take care.
Oh, thank you. Bye-bye.